Right, so let's talk about web services. So towards the end of the last century, there was a lot of activity and research and development on how we could integrate uh, applications and enterprises and companies that were using disparate databases, that were using disparate languages, different operating systems, and these were large corporations, had a lot of information, a lot of data, and we wanted to see how we could perhaps have them integrate amongst each other. For instance, you might have a Ford Motor Company integrating with their supply chain and automate all their supply chain in such a way that if they were running low on tires or running low on whatever materials, that it would automatically create a new order for the supply chain for those particular materials to arrive. If they needed a loan from a financial institution, again, all that automate that integration as well, where they could perhaps use a very well known or very well defined API where Ford Motor Company can easily integrate with these systems. Also, if there was any regulation that they needed to apply or to adhere to some governmental policy, then also that integration might be done automatically. To address this big challenge, folks were devising a way that perhaps we could somehow wrap systems legacy systems that were already established, that had already databases that have been using these for decades, and folks didn't want to reinvest the capital to perhaps bring that up to date or to change the infrastructure in any way. This says, well, why don't we wrap all these legacy systems with an interface that is very well known, perhaps follows a particular international standard, and we can then use these endpoints, use an agreed upon format, right? And then we can just integrate all these things, right? And for instance, Hertz might purchase other rental car companies, right? They might integrate other rental car companies, but it turned out that all these acquisitions of corporations buying each other, made it very hard for an enterprise or company to be able to share information even within the same corporation, right? Same with Bank of America, as it buys other banks or smaller shops. Each one is going to have its own infrastructure, its own databases, its own, and it just makes it really challenging to incorporate all these disparate systems so that it's one monolithic solution. So again, the idea was, well, what if we can wrap these things, right, and provide an interface that abstracts all the details of each one of these bubbles, right, and then we could use all these interfaces to create something that can work together. And there was a lot of research, a lot of development towards this. There was a huge promise that this was going to work. Large corporations, Oracle and IBM and Sun Microsystems back then, they were all in the race for providing the best solution to allow this. And so the idea of a service-oriented architectures became very popular, and they were competing with each other to see who could provide with a push a button create these wrappers. Obviously the .com bust kind of threw that monkey wrench into that. And it turned out that that integrate system, they found out that it's much harder than we thought, right? So it's very hard. Nevertheless, the technology stuck with us. It's still alive, but we don't have the kind of grandeur ideas that we perhaps had back then. We have more realistic ideas today of using these technologies to expose data models or data sets that are very useful, and folks can integrate with them any which way they want. Now, back then, the integration, the interface between these disparate systems used to be XML. So everybody had agreed that XML was the easiest way to a standard way of exchanging data amongst all these systems. Today, with the advent that most everybody is moving all their enterprise to the web, and JavaScript becoming so pervasive and ubiquitous, today instead of XML, it's become JSON has become much more used today as opposed to XML. Also, back then, folks were trying to solve the problem of all these systems running in their own little bubble, and wanted to say, well, what's the best way of these systems to send information across, right? And they're running into challenges such as having to configure ports, secure ports, so that we can exchange binary information amongst each other, and it turned out that the web servers have been around for quite a while. They have been they've been used mostly for hosting static content, HTML, CSS, whatnot, and pretty much nobody really cared about the security of port 80, right, of web servers, as opposed to if you were trying to ask for any other port, the system administrator was very antsy about allowing you to open up a port for inter-process communication, but nobody seemed to care about port 80, and also servers were a dime a dozen. They were cheap, or even free, and you could start up a server just with a couple lines of code and you're done. So folks gravitated towards using web servers as a mechanism for inter-process communication, right? That I could just expose a port 80 and then I'm done. I can just start communicating data across this port, and so with the advent of JSON and folks using more and more HTTP servers, became more and more what we know today as called web services. Web services is a technology that allows us to provide an API, a URL or an HTTP API that allows us to create inter-process communication. Right? Obviously, in a web development environment, typically that the communication is between the browser and a server, right, in a client-server architecture, right? But it doesn't have to be that, right? It could be inter-process communication between any two systems, not necessarily web. Obviously, for this course, we're interested in how this pertains to web applications and whatnot. But this concept goes beyond just the web. Okay. So let's talk about web services and how they can be used for client-server applications such as React or Angular or jQuery running on the browser and intercommunicating with the process on the server side. Make sense?